Okay, I'm Betsy McDowell from Salem, Oregon. I'm a national board member of the American Association of University Women, and I've served on the Salem branch board for many years. I want to welcome you officially to our meeting today, Women in Politics, Why So Few? Have our panelists take a seat. We'll see if we can get our slides going. And I want to remind you that there will be Deanie Anderson from the League of Women Voters has note cards. If you, at any time, you're generating a question from the discussion, just raise your hand and she'll provide you a note card for you to write a question that we'll address at the end of our 7 questions for our panelists. There we are. All right. So the U.S. ranks 77th on a UN list assessing women's participation in national government. That seemed a little bit embarrassing and shocking when I found that out. You can see that we rank behind Iraq, Cuba, Rwanda, and Sweden, who are in the top 5. You'll see this number, the 23% of statewide offices in Oregon. That number, 23 to 29%. Runs pretty true in state, city, county, and national representation of women. However, we're kind of below the grade at the U.S. Congress. And in Oregon, we have only one woman in our delegation. Next slide. There's the 29%. 2 of our 7 Supreme Court justices are women. And in the Big 5, we have Kate Brown and Ellen Rosenblum. In our elected executive. Go ahead. We've had 3 women county commissioners in Marion County for many years, 1 of the 3 in Polk County. We have a woman mayor. And 2 of our city councilors are women, Diana Dickey, who's here today, and Laura Tesler. So we're trending a little above. So, any surprises here? Women are less likely than men to show the ambition to seek political office. Women react more negatively than men to many aspects of modern campaigning. Women are more likely than men to perceive the electoral environment as biased against them. But what causes that attitudinal difference? The reality is that incumbents are reelected over 90% of the time. Campaign finance is biased toward the incumbent, so we see why that trend may be occurring. In general, women are perceived as less corruptible and more educated than men in politics. And when 1/3 of the personnel on a committee are female, there's more compromise and progress. 86% of Americans believe that they are ready for a woman president. Women are coveted candidates, so why is there a general lack of women participating in the electoral process, or in the candidate process? I think that's it. Thank you. Our panelists today are Darlene Hooley, State Representative, or a U.S. Senator and U.S. House Representative, Jackie Winters, State Senator, Diana Dickey, Salem City Council, and Sharon Blasey, City Council candidate. As an intro, for about 5 minutes, I've asked each candidate to give us a brief biography and a comment about why they chose to run. And we'll start with Darlene Hooley.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. I grew up in Salem, mostly in Salem. But let me tell you how I got involved, and it was a real simple thing. And I think a lot of women actually get involved this way. I started out in politics because my son fell off the swing at the playground and hit his head on the swings. So I thought, well, why would we put cement under playground equipment? Didn't understand that at all. So I thought, well, I'll just make a simple phone call to the mayor and ask him to change it, because obviously he will see that this is the right thing to do. So I called the mayor and said, I think we need some other softer substance other than cement. And he said, no, it's the cheapest thing to do. So I thought, okay. And I recruited another guy to run for mayor, ran his campaign, and he won. Well, he was all about removing the cement under the playground equipment. The problem was he didn't have enough other members on city council that agreed with him. So that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to get this done. I'm just stubborn enough to not let that go. Something I think is so simple. And so I ran for city council. I was the first woman on city council, first woman elected in West Linn. And we eventually got the cement removed from under the playground equipment, and actually new playground equipment. So that's how I got started in politics. Thank you.
And Diana Dickey?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I went to Oregon Girls State when I was in high school. I don't know how many of you here have attended that, but that's a kind of a mock legislature where you kind of go through, and it was at Willamette University, and that really gave me a taste for it. This is something I want to do someday. But then I just sort of put that on the back burner. I was involved in student government when I was in college, in their executive leadership. But then, I just got busy with life and other things and just thought, oh, someday I'd like to do that. Well, and then we moved to a neighborhood that had an undeveloped park. So we're talking about parks again. I called the city just to say, hey, what would it take to get this park developed? And through the whole course of events, that's what led me to run for city council. It took us 8 years, but we got the park developed. But it took a lot of persistence. It took a lot of learning about the process. And through that, I also learned about other issues that were important in my neighborhood that I felt like in my community were not being represented, not being addressed. So it was kind of unexpected. I wasn't planning on running for city council when I made that phone call to say, what do we need to do to get this park developed? But it was the right time because there were a lot of unattended issues, and it's been great. I've been on the city council now for about 5 years, and we've made a lot of progress. We've been able to do a lot of things, like I said, including the park. So that's how I got started, and it's been really exciting, and it's a little lonely because there aren't a lot of us women out there, but hopefully all of us here can be an encouragement as we go through our talk this morning.
And Sharon Blasey?
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. I think this is a really relevant conversation right now, especially with the election going on right now. But this is a topic that's really kind of in the forefront right now. There's a lot of discussion right now about equality for women, and we saw just this week a young woman receive the Nobel Peace Prize for her work with women's rights. So I appreciate that we're talking about this even at the local level. I had to laugh, though, because when Judy asked me to participate, I said to Judy, you do remember that I lost, right? And she said, well, that's okay. We appreciate that you ran, and we appreciate that you served. So, I bring a little bit different perspective. I've run and lost a campaign, but I did serve on council for a while. I moved to Salem about 14 years ago. I had been in the Navy for 14 years, so my leadership experience comes from a lot of time in the military, which I'll talk more about as we talk about the questions. After I got here, I got a master's in public administration, and I went to work for Secretary of State, who currently, as you know, is Secretary of State Kate Brown, who is a huge advocate for women and women in politics. Sorry. And since that time, I've worked as a performance audit manager for the Secretary of State, and that's given me a lot of opportunity to look at issues that affect us not just in Salem but in Oregon as a whole. I also currently serve on Salem's Planning Commission and several other committees for the city. So I kind of did things in the reverse order. I started on city council and then kind of went went to some committees, but each of those committees has just been a fantastic experience. I actually started about 4 years ago in civic life. Didn't really get involved in anything until just 4 years ago. There was an announcement in the paper for the Courthouse Square Task Force. And so I applied and was appointed to the task force to look at the redevelopment of or rebuild of Courthouse Square. And the unique thing about that was I was the only woman on a committee of 24. And it didn't really dawn on me until probably the second meeting when I looked around and realized I was the only woman on that large of a committee. So again, I think this is very relevant. So thank you.
And our third term state senator, Jackie Winters.
Thank you, and it is a pleasure to be here with you this morning. And this is a conversation that is being held across this nation. I'm a member of Women in Government, and just a few weeks ago, I was in New Orleans where we had the same subject and content to talk to young university women who were in Tulane and other universities, trying to encourage them to become involved. And actually talking to them about almost the same questions that we're going to talk today. For me, I think it's like I've always been involved, somewhere, somehow. My first thirst, if you will, of wanting to become involved was, I think, it was actually in the late 60s when we were starting talking about model cities in Portland. As a mother of 4 sons, we had a grocery store, a little neighborhood store that had moved in, whose hours exceeded what we thought was reasonable. And we were advised, that we went to the owner and said, would you please, reduce your hours because you advertise as having the coldest beer in town. And if you lived in Northeast Portland, advertising that you've got the coldest beer in town, people were coming from all over the city after hours to get their cold beer. Well, you can just imagine the level of conversation that as a parent, I didn't want my children to hear. And after our meeting with the owner, and we were advised that he paid more taxes than all of us combined, it was then, what do you do about it? We organized our community, and we went to City Hall. And not only did we have a conversation with City Hall, we started sending letters to City Hall to get their attention. And we not only were successful in reducing the hours, but the hours were reduced lower than what we had recommended to the owner to begin with. And I think that was the beginning of recognizing that you had a voice and recognizing that you could make a change. My career path, of course, has taken me from model cities and my involvement to here to Salem, and where I, have done everything from organize and lead the first $1 Million United Way campaign, and so it just seemed like a pathway that's kind of led me to run for office after having served 2 governors. So but I think the voice was what propelled me, and that you saw that you could make a difference.
Well, for our first question, I don't want you to rush. Give yourselves time to think a little bit if you want to. I want to just take on the idea of women's underrepresentation in elected government head on. As Senator Winters was just saying, it's a conversation that's going on not just in the States, but all over, and it's a thorny issue. But after you've run a campaign and you have experience, I'd like to know, starting with Diana, your inside experience and perspective on why women are not running for office and elected to office in the numbers that men are.
So I think there's probably a number of reasons that women aren't running for office. I do think it's interesting that, and I've been guilty of this myself, when there's a woman who has been very successful in running for office and she has a family and she has all these other things going on, it's easy to go, how does she do that all? Who takes care of her kids? Who does all of those household things? We never say that about men. We never look at a man and go, how does he do it all? Who's taking care of his kids? Who's doing his dishes? Who's doing his laundry? So I think that, there are some of those kind of nagging, how do you manage it all? And having a supportive family certainly is very helpful for that. So I think that's one thing. I think that women often feel like they don't have the professional background or skills that they need to run for office. I'm not realizing that, any experiences they have are something that they can bring to the table. I mean, I talked about wanting to get a park developed in my neighborhood. Well, I brought the experience of, hey, I'm a mom, I've been a teacher, I understand about kids, I understand about families and some of my own professional background. I didn't have a professional background in public policy development, but I could bring something to the table that said, this is why this is a good policy, this is why this is good for my neighborhood. It's not just about my kids having a place to play, but there's a whole lot of other reasons. And so it was a little hard sell for me too when I was first thinking about running, because I had those same questions. Gee, do I have the skills? Do I have the background to do this? So I think that's another thing. And then trying to figure out how will I manage it all? Especially at the local level, a lot of times we're volunteers. So that is just, it's another thing, when we have our families, when we have we have our jobs, we have other things that we're doing. So I think there's a number of reasons. There's probably not one answer, but I think that every woman has something to offer, and I would just like to leave that encouragement.
Thank you. I want to add that Darlene Hooley perhaps underestimated the content of her biography, so I want to fill in a little bit about that before she addresses this question. Well, it will take too long for me to really fill it in completely, but she was appointed to service and was then elected to the state House, and then she was elected 3 times to the U.S. House of Representatives. Her first election was won very narrowly, but after that she succeeded quite well by taking a moderate position in a fairly balanced back then district. She was on after the September 11th attacks, she was on the the Financial Services Committee. She worked on identity theft. She was on the meth, do you remember when meth was such a problem? Yes. Meth and eco-terrorism committees, the Oregon Death with Dignity Act. She worked on the Veterans Affairs Committee in the House. She voted against deploying troops to Iraq. She served on the Science, Technology, Engineering, and Commerce Committee, and she was the House Democratic President, is that right? Okay.
Yeah, well, yes.
In your first term?
Freshman, yeah.
Yep. And you can tell that she has seen many sides of many things, but I wanted to emphasize that this career started in 1980. So, with a different perspective in time and chronology, do you have a bit to add to the question of why women are underrepresented?
I think my story is probably pretty typical for women. First of all, as you know, I told you the story about why I ran for city council. And I was through with, I accomplished my goal, and I left at the appropriate time after my term was over. Then I had somebody knock at the door, and they came in to talk to me, and they said, we want you to run for the state legislature. I said, I don't even know how a bill is passed. Mm-hmm. How could I run? They said, do you know a lot of people? I said, yeah, I do, because I'd been really active in my community. So they asked me to run, and I said, well, I guess okay, but I really don't know how a bill is passed. And so I ran. I had 4 opponents in the primary, and I made it through that and made it through the general election. Then I got a call for me to run for county commissioner of Clackamas County. And I thought, well, you know, I think I'd like to go in the private sector. But they called again and said, we have never had a woman on city council, on county commission. We have never had anyone from the west side of Clackamas County on county commission. And you really need to do this. So I took that appointment and then I ran. Then it came to running for US Congress. Again, I had no interest in flying across the United States. I didn't feel like I was qualified. I had actually never, well, I had been to Washington, D.C. So I got this call, and people kept bugging me about running. And I said, well, let me help you with other people. No, we want you to run. Well, let me give you some other names. No, we want you to run. And I kept saying no. And finally, one day I got a call. We were in a meeting, and they said, you're wanted on the phone. I said, but I'm in the middle of a meeting. They said, no, the vice president wants you on the phone. I go, tell him I'll call him back. And they said, no, it's the vice president. So I said, oh, well, maybe I should take that call. So he talked to me, and he talked to me about being my duty to serve our country. And I said, but I've served my state, you know. And he said, it's time for you to serve your country, and we need you to run. So I ran, and I won. Now, the reason I tell you that story, I think it is very typical for women, at least in my era, that not very often did people run without having somebody, women didn't run without somebody asking them or saying, have you ever thought about running for office? You would be terrific in office. That just doesn't happen for women. And when it does, it makes a difference that somebody is out there that knows you, that has faith in you, that says, you know what, you can do this. And so that's really, my whole career was, I did it because somebody asked me to.
Thank you. And Senator Winters was elected to the Senate in 2002, but prior to that served on a list of committees and boards so long that I was daunted by that and impressed. And you too have an interesting chronology behind your service. Have you a different experience coming into politics than Representative Hooley?
No, she's correct that I also was asked by some individuals of, you should run. When I ran for the House, the State House, and then again for the Senate, there's a vacancy, it's open, and we think that you should be the one that runs for that seat. It's also, but I need to go back a little bit and add on to what Darlene has said. Both of us were during a period of time, and I think she will attest to this, when actually as women, there was a lot more organizational activity and conversation among women at the Capitol. I can recall some of the meetings and after-hour conversations with women and talking about we should. And these conversations was not about an RRD. It was about women. It was about, I can still remember some of the social hours we'd have at the old European Inn that used to be on Commercial. And it wasn't just with individuals interested in the legislative branch, but also the executive branch as well. And I need to say that because I'm talking about a few years back.
Yes.
When, there was this interaction among women to talk about what role and function that we could play both legislatively. Some of the individuals whom I have a tremendous respect for and who were involved with me during those days were like Betty Roberts, who was there, Norma Paulus, and we can't forget Gracie Peck and others, right, who also would be there to give you that little boost and encouragement. Nancy Riles, if the guys asked you to run. Yeah. So it's similar, because the task at hand is one, the ability to not only have the volunteers to help you, but the dollars to help you as well, so.
And Sharon Blasey, you bring the time forward into a recent campaign. What would you like to add?
I would just add to that. I think definitely the reason maybe women don't run, definitely like Deanna was saying, it's just not a traditional role for us. And you know, I think women still have so much going on. You know, our generation right now, we certainly have, you know, we're raising children, and we're also taking care of parents oftentimes, and so we're busy. We're still filling those traditional roles, but I think in addition to needing to be asked, we also are at the point where I think women in our community especially just don't know what the opportunities are. We don't know that we have a skill set, like Diana said. We don't know that the work that we do directly translates to policy making. I was very shocked and happily surprised that when I was appointed to City Council, that the work that I did, you know, for the state directly translated, but I didn't know that. So I think part of the reason women don't run is just because we maybe don't know what the opportunities are. I know, like right now in Salem, we're struggling with trying to find women in particular to fill committees. You know, we have boards, we have commissions, we have committees. And I think it's part of the problem is it's us. We're not telling people what the opportunities are. We're not asking women to run. We are not asking women to step up. And so I think, you know, we have to take responsibility for that as well. But things like this, I think are fantastic because now we're talking about it. You know, like was just said, there used to be an environment where maybe women had more of an opportunity to talk about how we can make a difference, and I don't know that we're doing that. So, and I did ask some folks when I saw the question. I went around and I asked several folks. I asked men and women, why don't women run? And it was interesting because even the differences in responses between men and women they were very different. And some of the responses I got from men about why women don't run was, well, it's still a good old boys club, so what do you expect? So just hearing, you know, other people's perceptions, you know, of why women don't run. But again, I think it's, you know, it's our responsibility to make a difference, so.
Thank you. You've touched on something that the other panelists also kind of got around to, and that is a skill set. Will you talk a little bit more about, you know, well, your college degree probably contributed to your skill set, your service in the Navy, but will you talk a little bit more about the skills that you feel are needed to be an effective legislator, leader?
Certainly. I do have a little bit unique background. I think I mentioned I served in the Navy for 14 years, and the last 4 of that was on board ship as a Navy supply officer. And what that taught me and the skill set that gave me was the ability to make a decision and make a decision quickly. And I think that is a very key attribute and skill that women bring to leadership roles and policy making roles, and I think it's needed. And again, I think it's something we maybe don't recognize that we have. And so, but for me, I developed that skill, you know, kind of in a rapid fire environment where you had to step up, you had to make a decision. Otherwise, you know, you were putting people's lives at risk or safety. But there are so many things that we do in our day-to-day lives that are very transferable. So your question about what are the skill sets, what's needed, it's the ability to make those decisions, but the understanding that you also can fail. And that's, I think, maybe where we as women struggle sometimes is accepting that it's okay to fail, and then, you know, resetting things. I ran a campaign. I didn't win, but that doesn't mean I'm, necessarily done. But learning a lesson, and I think that's, again, that's a characteristic that is so helpful, and is just, learning to trust yourself and knowing that you can develop those skills. If there's an area that you're interested in, say, for example, a board or a commission or a park, finding something that you're passionate about and then developing, that skill set around that to make a difference.
And Representative Hooley, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, first of all, I think men and women make decisions very differently.
Right.
And I will tell you a little story, and that was several years ago. I was talking to a group of women administrators at the community college level. They were having a conference, and at that time, I just happened to know that a lot of community colleges were having opening for the presidency of that community college, and almost every president was a male. So when I asked the group of women that were there, I said, how many of you thought about applying for the job of the community college, president of the community college? Not one single hand went up. Then I said, well, how many in this room have told one of your colleagues, why don't you run for community college president? You'd be terrific. How many of you have done that? Not a hand went up. And then I asked the question, how many of you in this room think that there's someone here that would be a terrific community college president? Every hand went up. Every hand went up. And I said, before you leave today, tell someone that you think would be good to apply for the community college job, president's job. Tell them how much confidence you have in them and urge them to do that. And it made a difference. All of a sudden, it was about 50-50. So we need to be encouraged. Men tend to think just the opposite. They go, well, heck, I've been around a couple years. I can do this. I'm going to run for community college president. Women have less confidence in themselves, and they need to be told. And so one of the things I hope that comes through today is that if you know someone, see somebody, think that they will be good in an elected office or on a board, ask them to serve, because we're going to get better representatives when you do that.
And Senator Winters?
I'd just like to add, because I think we limit ourselves. And I was sitting here thinking, and I heard the word skill set. The majority of women are budgeteers. The majority of women are managers. The majority of us are decision makers every day. And these are transferable into that legislative process. And Darlene's correct. Men think, oh, yes, I can. We think that we've got to say, no, I can't. And there was another point that Darlene made, and she talked about when she didn't know how a bill became law. Most individuals who come to the legislative process don't know, male or female, how a bill becomes law. That was not a part of their educational background.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting how our limitations are and how we begin to think, oh, no, I can't. I don't have this. I don't have that. And Darlene's correct that guys are just the opposite. They don't go through that kind of maturation in order to go to the next level. The other piece I'd like to add is that guys, and I raised 4 sons, are in a competitive mode all the time. And they learn how to play as a team, whether it's football, basketball, and what have you, or even if it's doing some antics down in the basement among siblings, they still are functioning as a team. As women, we don't. By and large, we're getting better.
Very better.
We're getting better. But, so it's time for them to pass the ball off to some, or the baton to someone else. They do. And it's just, we're back still with our skill set. This is not our role and function. And I think if anything else, that's why I go back to the years when there were the Betty Roberts and the Norma Paulises and those who were saying, we need to begin to start developing others, or we'll deplete women in the legislative process. And certainly as women, we do come with different thought processes. And we also come with a different decision-making pathway. And I think, I was sitting here, and she's going to get to that question, so I won't leapfrog to it, on some of the major decisions that you made and how you did those. And in my caucus, at one time, I was the den mother, because all of my entire caucus, I was the only woman. So my role I adopted was to be their den mother in order to get what I needed to get done.
I've heard Nancy Pelosi say the same thing on TV. You gave me a nice segue. Oh, sorry.
I just want to add.
Yes.
I just want to add one thing. When I was talking about women like to be asked or need to be asked, when I went as a freshman in Congress, I had no idea what I was doing. Not a clue. And it was so different than the state legislature or county commission. And the women in our class met together, and there weren't very many of us. There were, I think, 9, and there were like 35 men. And the few of us that were women, we went to a little meeting and talked about what we would like to do eventually in Congress and what leadership positions we'd like. So everyone went around and they got to me and I said, well, I just need to learn first. And they said, well, why don't you run for class president? I said, well, are you kidding me? And they said, no, run. Now, I'm the woman there with tennis shoes on. So I go, okay, I'll run. And they nominated about 4 or 5 guys, and then I stood up and gave my little speech. And they elected me. I would never have done that. Never, never, never in a million years had not the rest of the women pushed me along. So I just want to emphasize how important that is.
Thank you to you both. Jackie, you gave me a nice segue via that sports metaphor. Title IX was passed in 1973. So women in their 50s are sort of the leading edge of women who may have participated in team sports. We believe, research is telling us, and Sharon is probably a very good example of this, the concept of you can fail and survive and live to, play, fight, compete another day. But outside of sports participation, which we feel is valuable, can you give us an idea of some of your best resources in building your leadership skills? We know that Diana was in Girls State. That sounds like a seminal event for you. But Jackie, would you like to kind of give us a detail of some of the leadership support systems that affected you?
I thought about this morning when I thought I'm the youngest of 6, and I
Okay.
certainly, as the youngest, didn't get it from my other 5 siblings because I was constantly there, see me, see me, see me, as the youngest child in the lineup. But certainly, I think my leadership skills started back at the University of Oregon Medical School. Back in the early mid-'60s as the supervisor of my clerical staff. And we often don't think about the skills that we have on the job and as they're developing and you had to direct, manage, make decisions and what have you. So I think that was the beginning for me. And those who have assisted me, and I tell this story often, was the director of medical records, who I said was my biggest mentor back there in the mid-late 60s. tough taskmaster, but I credit her to this day of that development that she did with me back there in those days. And it wasn't easy when you're talking about late 60s to be at in an environment that is pretty much all controlled by males. And particularly when you're having to actually edit records and then calling the medical profession in and asking them to change a diagnosis or what have you. I mean, after all, you don't rise to that level. So I do think that that was probably the beginning of the development of skills, and I've had a lot of help along the way from both male and females in leadership development, and I feel myself very, very blessed.
And Diana?
I would say,
I think I got my skill set from my parents, especially my mother. I lived in a farm in North Dakota without electricity and water and all those kind of things. So you really had to work as a unit in a group. But my mother was the most positive person I have ever known in my entire life. And she just pounded it into you that you could do anything you wanted to do. And she was a woman who had lived with a variety of sisters because her mother died when she was 3. She never got to go to any kind of training school, but she had great confidence in all of her children. And I'll never forget one day I was downtown with my mother in Salem, and she ran into somebody she knew, and they started talking. I was sort of standing off to the side, and my mother said, "Oh yeah, all my kids are straight A students." Well, I didn't want to embarrass her in front of this woman, but I said, "Mother, how could you say that? We're not straight A students." And she said, "Yes, but you could be." So I think it was that kind of confidence that I got from my mother.
All right, we'll take that. Diana, would you like to add?
yeah, in addition to Girl State, I want to say that my parents were very critical in developing my leadership skills. Neither one of them graduated from college. My mom didn't go to college at all. My dad just had a few college courses. But yet they were very insistent that both my sister and I go to college and graduate from college and then do whatever our hearts wanted to do, where we were being led. So that was really important. But another thing is, my dad was a Korean War veteran, so I saw his service and I saw the value of him serving his country. And then in addition, I grew up in a small logging town in southern Oregon in Myrtle Creek. It's a little bit south of Roseburg. And my dad became on the Planning Commission, and he was actually on the Planning Commission for about 25 years there. And that 25 years kind of spanned the era of the timber crisis. So like through the 80s and through the 90s. And I saw how they really had to face those difficult challenges. How are we going to protect and preserve our community? How are we going to make all these new land use rules, all the things dealing with the loss of some of the timber income? How are we going to make that fit into our community and continue to make our community livable and viable and protect our businesses? So that was something that I saw. I saw that him and his colleagues really work hard at how they were going to address it, and they did a great job. They had some great successes. The Planning Commission then passed on their decisions to the City Council, and they did a fantastic job of that. And so that was just been a great example that I have been able to follow, and I think that's been something I continue to look back on and think, wow, how did they do that? When I see a challenge in my own service, I think about that, and it's been very helpful.
And Sharon?
Well, with regards to leadership support, my first career in the Navy, I would say there was very, very little leadership support. Being, one of 10 or whatever the ratio was at the time, and I think it continues today and is kind of still reflective of our society as a whole. But being a woman leader in the military was incredibly challenging and not very supportive, but it just made me want to try harder. It just made me mad. And So, learning perseverance and overcoming things and just to spite them. But things changed. Got out of the service, moved to Salem, went to work at an agency that is very supportive. And I will say right now, I work for Secretary of State Kate Brown, who is, again, just a phenomenal person to look up to as a woman leader. And I think for me, the last 4 years has been finding mentors, whether they know it or not. Diana. Folks, other women that I can look up to. Diana is someone who, when I decided to run for council this year, I had a lot of questions. I didn't want to overburden her and others, but Diana and others, even Mayor Peterson and Laura Tesler were folks where I knew if I had a question, I just didn't understand the process, that I could go to, and just had an enormous amount of support. So the leadership support, yes, people will ask you, but you also, again, it's up to us to seek out that support, I think, which can be daunting and challenging, but there is the support there, and I think everyone has said it. We need to offer that support.
Thank you. And the two of you have alluded to challenges in leadership, and
Can I just add, because I don't want to
Certainly.
give the impression that
Yes.
the only support that is offered is support from just women, because because, my support and others, and I don't want to lead the impression that you can't go to the male gender for support, because, if I look back in my career, I had Tom McCall and Ed Westerdahl and Governor Attia, and a lot of males in my life. So I just need to clarify that so that there isn't that misunderstanding that women think that they can't go to men also to ask for support. And some of them are very willing to assist us in this endeavor.
yeah, the audience might not know that Governor Attia appointed you as ombudsman for the state, which is, quite a lofty position. So that was a strong vote of confidence for you.
The largest complaint department in the state.
And there you were. To go with the segue of challenges, and Diana and Sharon both referred to this. Diana, would you start with what was your biggest leadership challenge?
I think in my current position as a Salem City Councilor, my biggest leadership challenge has been, and many of you have heard the discussion about our potential third bridge. And this has been a leadership challenge because it has required working with everything from outside of the city of Salem. We have to work with the federal government, we have to work with the state of Oregon, all the way down to working with our local neighborhoods who would be significantly impacted by the construction of a bridge. And that's been a big challenge because it's hard to bring all of those people together. And we've never all had everyone together in the room at the same time, but it really takes sitting down with each of the interested parties, whether it's an affected business, an affected residents, whether it's trying to work with the state on what are some of the environmental issues. And this is not a resolved issue. This is an ongoing challenge. So I don't want to give the impression that we've resolved it. I mean, this is a many, many year-long process. But over the last year and a half, it's really been a lot of work to try to engage every interested party and try to come to some solution. Again, we don't have an answer to it. I can't speak to that at all, but it's been really good too, because it's been a good opportunity to learn how we can try to bring people together, how we can come to a compromise on very difficult issues, because this is going to be a regional project. This isn't all just about in my little area of North Salem that I represent. So it's an ongoing challenge. Stay tuned for that, but I would say that's been my biggest challenge so far.
Thank you. And Sharon? You've touched on this a little bit already.
And I don't want to sound like I'm not grateful for the experiences I had, but definitely, and this is a forum about women in politics and leadership roles, and I think it's okay to continue to talk about a little bit about the challenges I faced in the Navy because, like I said, I think it's still reflective of society, kind of in general. I joined the Navy in 1985, and women did not go to sea at that time. It was at the time when we still had the combat exclusion law. So there was a lot of resentment towards women in general in the military because we were taking up the shore billets, and that's very understandable. But then when the combat exclusion law was repealed in the early 90s, late 80s, we were on ships, and we were resented for that. I was in the service when tailhook occurred, and that brought to light so much of the inequity issues and the sexual harassment issues, and again, going back to a leadership challenge, I was in a leadership position in the Navy, and it was hard to overcome every single day. But leadership challenges also create leadership opportunities. And I learned so much, and it gave me confidence to just continue on. So again, I think the greatest challenge for me was just overcoming an uncertainty, or knowing that not everybody wanted me to succeed, I think. So, just given that just by the sheer fact that I was a woman, but again, it created just some very unique opportunities and a very distinctive skill set.
Thank you. And Senator Winters.
I'm here thinking because there's so many challenges when you're on Joint Ways and Means, but trying to balance the state budget. I think the greatest challenge was when I was first elected, and we had we were still in term limits, and there were a lot of legislators who actually were termed out, and so the experience had been depleted in the legislative process, and because of the depletion of experience, I found myself, and even though I had had experience over on the executive side of government, I found myself in a position where suddenly I was being the individual who came into the legislative process with a lot more experience than some of those who had been there before me, which meant that committee assignments became where the leadership said, aha, because you actually know the process and because you've been in the executive branch, we're going to give you a heavier workload. So you really didn't have the time to get your feet wet. And so I found myself actually on the Quality Ed Review Committee, which was a very, very big issue during that period of time. I found myself on Human Services. I found myself on Ways and Means. I found that other legislators were saying, well, we want you on your committee. And balancing those times and making certain that you're doing an adequate job was challenging for me, and just navigating everything. And I wrote down also budgeting for me. Every session is challenging, and I think probably the one year where it was the most was 2003. 2003 was the year where we were really struggling with balancing the budget. I happened to have been the chair of Ways and Means Human Services. I had crafted the budget, and in those days, we did not have co-chairs. You were it. And your job was not only to help craft that budget, but you had to get that budget through both chambers. And I can still remember it, so I got the through, and always in budgeting, you're crafting a budget while over here in another committee, they're dealing with revenue. And in budget, you're actually putting together what you believe, you and your members of your committee and LFO believe what is needed and necessary for the citizens of the state of ours. And so after I had completed the budget and was successful in getting across the Senate and the House floor, the revenue package then came. And that was the one, if some of you remember, that yours truly was a surcharge, and I will never forget it. because the challenge was, does Senator Winters vote for a tax, a surcharge? And Senator Winters took that vote. And I was asked later, and I didn't have to, and I was asked later, why did you do that? And I said, I couldn't in all good consciousness put together what I believe was a budget that was needed and necessary for the citizens of this state and not vote for the revenue in order to implement it. And I still have the scars on my back for that vote. But, you know, in this process, there are challenges that you meet, and then there are your convictions that are also there in your decision-making. I think that was probably one of my biggest challenges.
Thank you. And Representative Hooley.
Well, my biggest challenge, I think, was dealing with the war in Iraq. I had spent a lot of time upstairs in a little room reading all of the reports of what was going on, and I voted against the war in Iraq because I didn't think we were prepared. And I was right, we weren't. And the people that really had it the worst over there, those men and women that served, tended to be from the National Guard. Because once they leave your National Guard and go into the military, into a war, they are no longer under the state, but they're under U.S. government in the military department. So our National Guard had no idea what was happening to all of their people that were now in the middle of the Iraq War. There's no communication between the two organizations, which I found very strange. And because this war had been anticipated on being a shock and awe kind of war that was all going to be done from the air, and it turned out to be more hand-to-hand combat. We had a lot of our soldiers in the regular Army and National Guard that were injured. The problem was when the federal government they wanted all the National Guard, but they weren't really prepared to take them. So when I went down to Fort Hood and looked at their barracks, I mean, there was mold in them. They didn't even have a bar of soap or a roll of toilet paper. And I was able at that time then to call our governor, Governor Kulongoski. I said, get your credit card down here right away. These guys need to have at least some basics in their room. And they were training with equipment that was broken, didn't work, because I watched them out in their training, and they would have the, what's the thing on the top, going this way and the barrel of the gun going that way. And I said, I don't think that's going to work really well. And then you found out that with the small bombs that they had, that we had not armored all of our vehicles over there. So I spent a lot of time, had no experience really before that with the military, but spent a lot of time making sure our men and women were protected, they had the right kind of equipment, that vehicles were, at least if they didn't have them armored, that they were up armored. And that was I think my biggest challenge in terms of dealing with a huge organization. I asked probably too many questions of the military, so they didn't all like me. And I was a communicator between the men and women that left from Oregon that were in the National Guard and the people back home, because once they're in the regular, once they leave home in the regular military, they don't know what happens to them. They don't know if they got injured. They don't know anything about them. And so that communication between what I provided between our own soldiers and those in the regular military. And it was a huge challenge, but it was one I thought that I owed to every person who was willing to serve in our military.
Thank you very much. Senator Winters has touched on the budgeting topic more than once, and I think that's a very valid piece of information that we hope we all have that talent and capability. But women are kind of funny about money publicly. A lot of times we don't want to appear to want money. We believe we're taking care of it, but in fact, if you look at the wage gap, it has been holding at the same level for a very long time. It leads to almost $1 million deficit in retirement and in Social Security gap. So when it comes to running a campaign, it seems logical that it would be difficult as a woman of any age to ask for money. And I would like you to talk to us about whether or not you think fundraising is an economic barrier to women participating in elected office, and if so, how you overcame it, or if you have other insights about fundraising for your campaign.
Well, and I need to go back because we do it all the time. Women actually, when you think about it, whether it's PTA and cookie sales and what have you, we do it all the time. The difficulty is that we're good at asking for others, we're just not good at asking for ourselves.
Right.
When you step back, and so, I had to get in this frame of mind that says, what's the worst thing they could say? So you start with family first, and then you start those who you think are your friends and that whole Christmas list, and you start there, and you go the big breath. But you'd be interesting once you've gone over those hurdles how a lot easier it becomes. And those of you who know me know that, I go back and I get my Jackie's ribs, because before that, we used to entertain a lot. You were my neighbor in the back of me, so we had barbecues all the time. And so, I take my catering skills and what have you. So I love to fundraise. I've gotten over that whole thing. I don't have any problem in picking up the phone and asking, and I love to give parties. So I've just combined the two skill sets. And ladies, we do have a lot of skill sets. So I combine these two skill sets, and I can find out a whole host of reasons to why I need to invite you to something. So, and that is a challenge. The challenge of raising money is there because you've got to buy postage, and you've got to have brochures, and you've got to have all of this. But it's one that I'm sure that Darlene will say the same. It's a necessary piece of running a campaign. Because how else are you going to get your name out? How else are going to people know that you exist? It used to be, and it's not quite as much anymore, as where we could rely on the print media, but that's not really true anymore. And now that we've gone, it wasn't even television when I first started that you were going to rely on, and so things have changed considerably. Social media is another one that you can use without cost, but it does cost to run a campaign. But for me, I turn it into a social event.
Sounds like a natural. Okay. Sharon, would you add to that, please?
Yes, of course. Wow, yeah, that was a real eye-opener when I ran, because I did serve on city council, but I was appointed, and so I didn't realize that I had to go and ask for money. And again, I went to Diana and said, okay, tell me the 5 things I need to do this week. And Diana said, start with a letter. And I think she even forwarded me a copy of her original letter. And oh my goodness, I agonized over that letter. That's hard. And I don't know if it's just women, but it's hard to ask people for money. But then it dawned on me, well, I run a nonprofit, and I ask people for money all the time. And so now I'm asking them to support me, and so that we can make a difference in our community. So after I started more and finally just, wrote the letter, signed it, and closed my eyes and sent it, and it's hard. It's very hard. But what I realized was throughout the campaign that people want to help you. And so by the time I got near the end of the campaign, people were asking me if they could give me money, and I didn't need any more money. And so I actually you know, it was just a very unique situation, but it was really, really hard to overcome that initially. But once I did, it got much easier to ask. But I never thought about the party aspect of it.
Diana.
Yeah, I would definitely say that raising money is one of the most difficult parts of running for office, and I have a hard time asking people for money. Despite the fact that I did help Sharon out, it's still very difficult for me. But one thing is, I actually have a number of friends who are right now running for office in different areas for different things, and so we kind of network and we chat with each other. And one of the things that we have talked about is this as being one of our biggest challenges as women going and asking for money, but coming to the realization that no one is going to donate to your campaign and not feed their children. They will give because they want to make an investment. They believe what you're doing is important, but they're not going to sacrifice basic needs for themselves or their family to do that. And so that does make it much easier to ask because you know that you're not taking away from their family or whatever. So that does help. But it is hard as women, I think, for me at least, to ask people for money. And because I'm always thinking, well, would they need that money for something else? You know, I think of that for myself when I'm doing my own budgeting, you know, and so anyway, but that has been a challenge. But it does get easier the more you do it and the more you realize, you know, that people really do want to help and they do, they want to support their leaders. And so it just, I don't know, it gets easier as time goes on, but that first letter, you're right, Sharon, is probably the hardest one to do.
Thank you. Representative Hooley?
I hate raising money. It was the hardest thing I did. I needed to take a chapter from Jackie's life
Have a party.
and have fun. And when I had run for other offices, we had, you know, done some fun things. We had fun parties. And, you know, you raise enough to run a campaign with a few fun parties. But all of a sudden, when you run for Congress, you're trying to raise $2 million. And I came up in a family that said, you never ask people for money. You know, if you don't have it, you don't spend it. Well, it was really hard for me to call up and ask somebody for $1,000, for $5,000. But eventually I did. I got way better at it. I never liked it. But sometimes, every once in a while, somebody'd come along and challenge you. And I had one guy I knew, because you have all these records of where they've given, so you know who they've given to. So he seemed to be willing to give to Democrats. I didn't know him, but I called lots of other strangers as well. But so I finally got him on the phone, and I asked him for $1,000. And he said no. So then I waited till after I won the primary and I got to the general election, and I thought, well, I'm going to call him again. Well, I called him 25 times before he ever came to the phone. And finally, when he came to the phone, I asked him for $1,000, and he said yes, he'd be happy to give that to me. I decided I would never call him again. I didn't want to go through that. But I was brought up in a family where you just didn't ask people for money. And so it was hard. And you cannot, at small fundraisers, possibly raise enough money to run the kind of campaign you need to run when you're running for federal office. But it's about $2 million a year now to run for office. And I think there's way too much money in campaigns. I was lucky that I made my goal every year. It was something I never learned to love. I got better at it. But I think one of the things we took on, again, as our freshman class, because how much I hated raising money for me, was the whole issue of campaign finance reform. And obviously, we were not successful because it has grown and grown and grown. And I really believe that that's an area that somehow we have to deal with. It is ridiculous the amount of money put in every campaign, and I can see so much better use for it than just, I employ some people, I guess I give them jobs. But other than that, you know, the money part was really difficult for me.
Thank you. I think that that would be answered completely differently had you been 4 men sitting here than 4 women. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
There's a difference?
I'm
No?
not no, I'm not so sure, because we have some men who have the same difficulty.
Do you?
In my caucus, I'm after them all the time to give parties. But no, not everyone is able to actually make those cold calls. And it is cold calls. It's calling and asking individuals to support you. And I think it's just human behavior that we actually are better at asking for others than we are for ourselves. And you don't, your mind doesn't put it in, well, it's ordered to actually, not for myself, it's actually for me to be a part of a political process. But it is difficult, and some guys are good at it, and some of them are not so good at it. And I would agree with Darlene, the amount you have to raise, not only at the national level, but at the state level now, when you consider we are a citizen legislature. Mm-hmm. Most of us are, you know, we're only there 5 months on the odd years, and then 35 days on the even. And we don't, audience, I'm not Congress. So the salary level is not the same that what we get as right. legislators. And we truly are. And that's one of the challenges for individuals running for the state legislature, that when you look at having to have, if you don't have another source of income, you cannot really exist on the income that you get from the legislature. So, no, it's challenging.
Well, thank you for expanding on that point, because it almost directs our candidates for state legislature to be self-employed or have, you know, personal wealth from another source. And do you think that that affects the process, the representation?
Or in a company that company, you see major law firms will often allow their lawyers to actually come and run for office and where they continue the practice. But it is a challenge, and I think that we really do truly need to look at it. It devoids our process, which I think is a mistake, of young minds, and you know, you have all these chronological advantages, that's what I call myself, individuals, and so we really do need to develop the youth, the young individuals. And yet, if you're having a family, you know, ask yourself the question, can you really do it and not have that income, or somehow to be able to take care of our first responsibility, which is our children and families. So it's a challenge for individuals unless they have an employer, unless they're wealthy, or unless, like in my case, it was, you know, I had Jackie's Ribs, and thank you, community, and Ted, who continued to work at Jackie's Ribs so that I could do this.
And Sharon, you were reacting to that conversation. Would you like to add to that?
I was nodding. Yeah, I don't know what the fix is, but it's certainly a deterrent. And I appreciate the comments about, you know, if we want individuals who are not independently wealthy or don't happen to have a spouse, or if you have a family and you need the 2 incomes, yes, and that was, I think, your original question was, is it a deterrent? It certainly is, because it makes it impossible, and you know, there's no way to give up a job for a lot of us. You know, I work for the state. There's no way I could give up a job for 5 or 6 months and then expect to come back, or you know, all the other things aside. But you know, it isn't possible. So you know, some of the political offices pay but you're taking a risk. You know, you're taking a risk that you're going to get elected, but you're going to stay elected. And you'll make a salary while you're serving, but if you lose the election the next time, do you have a job to go back to? What do you do? So serving on city council, like Diana said, is a little unique. It's not a paid position; it's full time. But fortunately, city council, most of the activities take place in the evening. Council meetings are in the evening, so it allows us to participate and still work. But we're working full-time and we're serving full-time. So that is a deterrent as well, so.
Some of those hobbies will be put on the back burner for a while. Do you want to expand on that, Diana?
I just agree with what Sharon said in terms of city council being volunteer. So that is my hobby. When people ask me, what do you do for fun at city council? I go to meetings and I sit on committees. And I mean, it's a great season, but it is a season because trying to work full time and balance everything can be a little bit challenging at times. So I think that definitely the lack of the income is definitely something that can be a deterrent, probably at any level of government.
What is your full-time work?
I work for Marion County as a health educator.
Thank you. So, leaving the nuts and bolts a little bit and more into the cerebral, what do women specifically bring to the political process, if anything, distinguishable? And it's I kind of hate to generalize in the sexes, but is there something that you would like to talk about or speak about your own experiences that, Jackie mentioned being the only woman at a committee of, was it 23? And are you heard? Are you?
Well, I think about it. We actually have the ability to, which sometimes we don't think about, that we do, of actually collaboration and bringing individuals together. Think about it as, if I go back to my 4 sons, I've had to actually break up a lot of fights. Prepared me well, absolutely. And I think when we talk skill sets and we talk about our abilities, those are some of the abilities that you have in working with others. Yeah. And certainly in the legislative process, you're working with others. You're working with your caucus. You're working with your committee. You're working with the community. And the other thing that I think that women bring to this table, and that is the ability, I tell others, there's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Because the ability to hear, and those are some skill sets that are invaluable in whether you're talking city council, whether you're talking as a legislator, or whether you're talking in Congress. Because we have to, hear your voices and hear in those hearings that come before us. And I'll go back. I think we underestimate ourselves and our abilities. I think we, constantly look at what we think that the guys bring to the table. We actually also bring something else to the table. When we got the Oregon Children's Plan passed, and that was in 2001, and I had the task of trying to get it across the House floor, we view the lens of children and those needs differently. And so, getting to understand the needs for having the Early Learning Initiative is one of those that has been driven by actually a lot of the women. The issue of having Healthy Start, and those have been driven by a lot of the women. Those are, one of my things that I'm so proud of. When I started, we had relief nurseries. We had 3, I think. Ann Aiken started the one that was an instrumental in Eugene. And then now we have 16. And it's because now the guys get it. But they didn't when we initially talked about having those respites, having them talk about how do you deal with things in a different way. Those are some of the things that come to the table that I think that women bring, as well as I think we're good budgeteers. Mm-hmm. If you look at those of us who serve on budget, And for some reason, we like detail. We're very good at detail. And when you're talking budget, you have to look at detail. So I just would like to just throw those out to women, and most of us are like math. I won't tell you about trig and all those, but we're that's for the engineers, but we really do know how to balance a budget.
Diana, do you want to add anything about how women affect the political process?
Well, I think Jackie said listening. I mean, that's really been probably the most critical thing that I have learned. I have honed my listening skills as I've grown on city council, and I think that's definitely probably the number one thing that women can bring to the table in a political environment. That's really critical. And it's interesting because I started out my career as an elementary teacher and a middle school teacher. I taught kindergarten for a few years. And so you think, well, you know, how can you translate teaching kids how to write their ABCs to coming to being a community leader? But then you learn quickly that it's much more than that. It's not just teaching kids how to write their ABCs, but it's helping them understanding, well, when they're not writing their ABCs, is it, you know, you have to do a lot of problem solving and critical thinking and figuring out, why is this child having a challenge? Is it simply that they just need a little more practice? Are they getting fed? Are they coming to school with, you know, enough to eat? Are there things going on in their home? Are there learning disabilities? So it really, it's a lot more than just, again, the ABCs thing, and then also teaching middle school is a whole different animal than teaching kindergarten, but it also brings, you have to do a lot of problem solving and that as well. And so, and teaching is it has been traditionally kind of a woman's job. I don't think it needs to be, I don't think it should be, because there are men that are very, very excellent teachers at all levels, but I think just, you know, even bringing that background in and at first it was like, well, how does that translate into the public arena? But just, I know I said it earlier, everyone has something to offer. Every woman has something that, you know, everyone comes with a different perspective and a unique perspective, and there is something that they can bring to the table.
I love that message. Do you have something to add, Sharon?
Sorry, I'm just nodding.
Yeah.
And I would reiterate, I don't think that this is just unique to women, but the question is, what benefit do women bring to the process? And I think what I've seen is, and it's been talked about, but it's a certain level of compassion, and really giving thought to a compassion, and what does this mean to our community? The decision that I make, how does it impact my neighborhood? How does it impact my entire community? How does it impact the children in my community and the parents and the families? And, you know, we have a lot of issues in Salem related to homelessness, and we have issues related to veterans. And I think that's something unique that we bring. Having, you know, spent some time on council and lots of other committees, I just think, quite frankly, we think a little differently. We as women, we tend to think maybe of the larger picture of what it means to a community as a whole versus this is an individual decision. And so I think that's very unique. And I am concerned that, you know, for the city of Salem, that we have one woman city councilor. And so if and when Diana wins and she rolls off of city council, you know, we need a woman to step up and ask to be appointed to Diana's position on city council. Otherwise, we're going to have 8 men on city council, and not that, you know, the world will come to an end, but we won't have that unique perspective that is so important. You know, it's important at the local level, it's important at the state level, it's important at the federal level, and I appreciate the women that have brought that unique perspective.
Thank you. And Representative Hooley.
I think we bring so much to the table, and we sort of forget how much we bring to the table. First of all, there was a time in the mid-'60s that most of the people going to law school were men, very few women. And I knew the woman that had graduated at the top of her class and had got the highest score on the the test they take after they get through with law school. And she couldn't get a job because she was a woman. And the excuses were extraordinary. You wouldn't like our language. We don't have a bathroom. Your husband may be in a case against you. We use language that you're not used to and you might not like. A woman at that time in the mid-60s couldn't buy a car on their own, couldn't buy a piece of furniture. And yet these women are the ones that broke through and said, we're gonna do this. And no matter how we get there, we're gonna be in law school, we're gonna be at the top of our class, and we are going to break that ceiling. And they've done that, and it's happened in so many areas. And still people, if you talk to people about doctors, they automatically think of a doctor as a man. Who is he that you go to when you talk about a doctor? And yet now we have as many women enrolled in medical school as we have men. So it's changing. And we bring a different perspective. We wouldn't have kindergartens without the women that were pushing for kindergartens. We would still be testing, medical testing, just on men if it hadn't been for the women pushing that we have, our bodies are different. We need to test both men and both women. We look at least when and I'm really old, I look at the choices I had when I came out of high school was I could be a teacher, I could be a nurse, I could be a filing clerk, I could be a secretary, I could be a hairdresser. That was sort of maybe work in a restaurant, but that was sort of the range. And we have seen that change because women do make a difference in those jobs, and they're hiring more women to be an executive than ever before. And I think all of that's good. The big gap now is on the for-profit boards that have mostly men on them. And it is very hard for women to break through on that level. So there's been a lot of breakthrough. Women bring a different perspective to medicine than men. It's not better or worse, it's just different. We were able to pass a law that allowed women to compete equally with the men in sports. I mean, they competed against one another. That happened because a woman legislator from Hawaii insisted that we do that. And I look at all the differences that women have made in Congress by being there. And one of my most, young women didn't serve in Congress because they had small children. But my most fun story about the difference women are starting to make and willing to serve is a young woman in New York who took Hillary Clinton's place, and she ran for the U.S. Senate. She had a small child, and she was pregnant at the time. And she was sitting on one of the military committees. And one day during the committee session, she said, "Oops, excuse me, Mr. Chair, I will be going to the hospital. My water just broke." I'm telling you, 20 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. 10 years ago, that wouldn't have happened. But it is happening. We have more women serving. I think they bring a different perspective that is needed in this country, and I think we've made huge changes. And a long ways to go, however.
Thank you for bringing up Patsy Mink, who wrote the Title IX legislation. And Oregon AUW, I think Joanne Stern was president at the time, and she's a Salem branch member, 1985 public kindergarten in Oregon. So, little blast of AUW's horn. I want to recognize Deanie Anderson in the front row from League of Women Voters, and if this discussion has generated any questions, she would like to collect them, and if you have a question, please raise your hand or stand, and she'll collect the questions while I ask a softball question I hope that'll be enjoyable for you. Your earliest leadership experience. And I was thinking about Jackie being the youngest of this big band of children and saying, look at me, and these things that happen to us in childhood, we really may not recognize until we're grown up what an impact they have, but peel your memory reel back as far as you want to, or as near as you want to give us an anecdote about what you feel was your earliest leadership experience, starting with Sharon, please.
So if I need to think back, I'll have to refer back to the Navy again, and I do have other experiences, but one that was kind of humorous, because one of the questions that we were asked was, when was the first time you realized you had leadership skills? And for me, it was after I received a commission in the Navy, reported to a ship that was deployed to the Persian Gulf. Again, this is at a time when women were just beginning to report to ships, and there was a lot of animosity. It was a very challenging situation, but like with any job, on board ship you are assigned collateral duties, and my collateral duty was I was to be the flight deck officer. I was a supply corps officer. I didn't know anything about running a flight deck, so the Navy sent me to a school, taught me how to launch and recover helicopters on board a large Navy ship. And our job at sea was we were a replenishment ship, and so we would literally have an aircraft carrier pull up along one side and a cruiser or a destroyer pull up along the other side of us, and we would launch and recover helicopters carrying stores to the carrier, to the destroyer, back and forth. And sounds interesting, but it was an incredibly dangerous and stressful situation. And my job, my leadership role, was to be responsible for the flight deck and those two helicopters and the safety of all the crew involved. And I had never had an experience like that, but after the first few times, what I realized about myself was I was incredibly cool and calm and collected in extremely stressful situations when others were running around crazy. And I didn't know that about myself. I didn't know that in that type of environment that I could function at that level, and things were done safely and orderly, and we never had any accidents. And so, it's kind of an extreme, but I guess the takeaway was you don't know what you can accomplish or what your skills are until you put yourself out there and you take on a challenge like that. So that was my very first real eye-opener about a leadership skill that I didn't know that I had.
Thank you. Diana?
So I think my first real leadership role was when I was in college. I was elected to student government. I ran the student elections and did a number, and also was in charge of all the student committees and clubs. And it was interesting as when I had to run a campaign and when I had actually kind of a tough opponent. So it was really kind of a humbling experience to realize that my fellow students had faith in my ability to do the job. And then, you win and you're like, oh, okay, now I have to learn how to do this job. But it was interesting because I was able to, we talk about bringing our unique perspectives. I was able to bring my perspective as a college student, knowing what the students needed. And like one of the things I was able to accomplish was starting the student book exchange. We didn't have a used book exchange for students at the time. This was at Western Oregon University back in the 1980s. And that program is still in existence. It's changed because we have different technology and stuff, but I'm really happy to have been a part of that because that was something that the students desperately needed. So I was able to do that. I reformed how we ran our student elections to make them more efficient, to save money, and a number of things. So there were things I was able to accomplish that Even when I first started that position, I wasn't really sure, how was I going to do this? What skills did I bring to the table? And so I think that's always kind of given me confidence that, even if I'm not 100% sure, I can do this. I can learn this. I'm able to learn this. I think we talked a little bit earlier about, women not quite being sure, but men are a little bit more likely just to jump into the arena on something. And I recently heard a statistic that whether it's going for a job or running for office, men will do it if they're about 50% sure that they have the skill set to do it. Women, it takes them to be about 80 or 90% sure that they have all the skills to do it. So I think that's something we can learn from our male counterparts and say, if they can do that, I can be 50% sure, but I know I can learn. And so that's something I've always tried to take away.
Thank you. And Representative Hooley? Earliest leadership experience?
Yes. It seems like my leadership was always in planning activities. And in high school, I was the one for our class that planned all the activities, because then I got to do what I wanted to do. And then when I was in college, I was babysitting for this couple, and they called and said, will you help with our daughter's birthday party? And I said, sure. So I thought of some games and cut the cake, and all the mothers were sitting there, and they said, oh, we'd like to hire you for our daughter's birthday. I said, well, give me a call. And so I ended up making a little business out of it, and I hired other students from school to help me with these birthday parties. And we ordered our stuff, wholesale, so we got all the prizes, and I wrote all the games that we were going to play. And I started a little business that came out of nothing, but it was I wanted to make sure that all the kids had wonderful birthday parties, and I knew how to plan them. And then it was in my neighborhood. I was the one that got people together and said, let's get together and have a pumpkin carving party. Or when someone father died in the neighborhood, I was the one that called them and said, oh, why don't you bring this and this and this so they have a nice dinner tonight. And when there was a big controversy in Westland over the school budget, I got another neighbor. She and I spent many nights going through that budget line by line, talking to the administrators to make sure that we had everything straight. And then we thought, well, we'll call a meeting of our grade school where our kids went to school. And we didn't know if 2 people would show up or 20 people would show up. We had over 100 people show up. And so we were very organized for the meeting, and people came out with a list of things that they wanted the school to do, and I took that to the school board, I took it to the school administrators, but it seemed like I was always in the middle of planning something, and I sort of don't know where it came from, other than I think I just wanted to have the kind of party I wanted, so I wanted to plan it.
Okay. And Senator Winters?
Well, similar to Darlene, and as you know, I love parties, but I think not just the childhood parties, and I was class president of home economics. That's probably where the Jackie's ribs come from, but not really, but that's where my cooking skills come from. I think probably one of my first real public, though, came from Model Cities. I was actually asked if I would lead and work with the League of Women Voters to organize the first Model Cities election that was required in order for Portland to receive the federal Model Cities grants, which meant that you had to get the community itself and to organize an election process in a way that individuals actually wanted to vote. It was not your regular presidential or state election, but an election that was designed to meet that community. And it was the community that really was not known for voting, whether it's a presidential election or other elections. And so that probably, in looking back, at my involvement was my work there, not only to work with the league and to actually get this particular community and to recruit others to work on this particular endeavor. That particular election is the largest turnout and vote in the history of that community, exceeding the President Kennedy election. So I was very, very pleased of the work and leadership that we did in that particular community. And as a result, of course, we did get the Model Cities grant. But so those are some of my thinking back. In addition to the parties that I love, and like Darlene, when you're PTA and Cub Scout mothers and what have you, and I stress that because these are leadership skills that I think sometimes we forget. Right.
Well, I can hear that it really wasn't a softball question at all, and I appreciate you taking it seriously. At this stage in the meeting, I'm going to have to ask just one panelist to respond for about 1 minute to our questions. I'm not going to direct it to an individual panelist except for one question, but the first I'm combining, have you ever experienced a personal attack based on your gender, and if so, how did you handle it? Anyone? No? Time or two. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead, Sharon? About a minute.
Okay, I'll keep it brief because I did mention this before, but I think what's important about it is it's still something that I think women are experiencing on some level. And again, I know it's still occurring in our military and tends to reflect in society as a whole. Certainly not to the level that it did before, but like I said, I joined the Navy in 1985. Things were very, very different. They're not where they need to be right now. We're still not there. So yes, I would say an attack on my gender occurred every single day. Trying to be a leader, but being undermined intentionally based on my gender and not based on my abilities or my leadership. So that was, yes.
Thank you. Again, anyone that will answer in about a minute, how will the top two primary system, if approved, improve or reduce the number of women for running for office? Will it have an effect if we approve the initiative for the top two candidate primary system that's on the ballot right now in Oregon? Neutral, positive, negative, any thoughts?
I hadn't thought about it. I think our bigger challenge is to get women to begin to actually run and participate. I mean, you won't have an effect unless you have a pool of women who are willing to actually get involved and engaged and do it. So I struggle with the question because of that.
Thank you. Okay. And please speak to the issue of the lack of civility in the political process that's been stated to be a deterrent to women seeking elected office. The lack of civility in political discourse.
I think women, if they were there, would bring some civility to the process. I think we have the effect of bringing civility to the discourse.
Thank you. And what do you feel is your role in mentoring other women in politics, regardless of political party? Do you feel that you have a role as mentors?
Anyway, and I know Darlene has them. If there are any students here, we do interns in my office that we actually mentor and shadow, and I've been doing it for years, and through that process, hopefully.
And Darlene was about to speak too, I think.
Yeah, I did. I've done a lot of mentoring. Some of those are now serving in the Oregon legislature. Some of them have called me up and asked if they could talk to me. Those include judges, it includes school board members, it includes county commissioners. So I've had a lot of people help me. And I have, I think, an obligation to help those that are now in a spot to make a difference in our state and in our country. And I am delighted to share any information that might help them on that path.
And the two of you have mentored each other, it sounds like, already. Came forward. And for Representative Hooley, regarding fundraising, what pressure did you experience from military contractors in return for their financial support? Is this a big problem, or was it a problem in the role of as a U.S. representative?
I don't know that I got any support from the military contractors for running for office. I was, what I got was a lot of people that were really interested in helping out the military, but also interested in making a profit for them. But they had the best of intentions to improve that property. Maybe I got some money from one of them, but mostly I was just out there on my own doing what I could do. And if I could help a company along the way that was good for the economy in Oregon, there were some companies that actually joined up on some up-armoring. I don't know that I got a contribution from either one of them, but that was not what I was looking for. What I was looking for is a way to keep our men and women safe over there. And it was very simple for me. If it helped, then I was going to go do everything I could to make it happen.
Thank you for that. The last question's a nice segue to something that I will close with, but I'd like you to address: how can we encourage, prepare young people to be involved in the political process?
Well, I would like to answer that. Part of it is giving them a chance. I mean, like Senator Winters, I had a lot of students work for me, and there was one young man I met at somebody else's house, and he said, "How do I even get involved in politics?" I said, "It's real easy. There are a whole bunch of people running for office. Pick one, go volunteer for them." And so he began to show up at my office and volunteered for me. And he was there from early in the morning till late at night. And after about a month, and he was trying to do another waiting job, as a waiter in the evening. But after about 3 weeks, I finally said to my staff, "Hire him. He is really good. Let's hire him." But I encourage people to try out, go to an office. Everybody wants a campaign person. And those that don't fool around, that work hard, are very likely to get, at some point, a job in that area. And I can attest to everywhere I look now in Oregon, it is a former Hooley staffer, and I'm very proud of the progress they've made.
That's a lot of success. As a close, one of the things that we're trying to build on is your successes and learning, from dead ends and glitches and failures. But we've learned that there is a development phase among females that occurs around 8th grade when they sort of pull back from their confidence. They might leave harder curricula in school. They might, for example, leave the math and science curriculum. Some of the programs directed at steering women through that phase are very strong. And then there's also a beginning, kind of a 5-year start on some campaign on campus projects, one of which is called Elect Her, and it is founded and run by Running Start. It's a nonprofit. It is available in Oregon. We can connect you with that if you're interested in participating or sponsoring, because it is there is a financial commitment. But what Running Start accomplished last year was 80% of the participants, and it is to get women candidates into campus government, 80% of the participants were elected. 17% on their exit survey said they would go on to run for higher office. So it's a start. Does anybody have any other comments that they want to make today? I certainly appreciate your time in coming and attending today. I also want to applaud our panelists because for all of us, our time is valuable, but I hope that you have gained a little bit of insight from each other, and I know that I have gained a lot of insight from listening to all of your comments and your participation today, so I want to thank you for coming. Do any of you have a comment you want to wrap with?
No, but I'd like to thank my friend Congresswoman Darlene for coming down to Salem to be with us today. And I also would like to know that, and you didn't mention it, but she received the Lifetime Achievement Award, didn't you not?
Yeah.
And so I just think we need to honor her. She served us well, both in our legislature as well as in Congress, and she's a dear friend.
Thank you. That was Britta Franz stating that there is an Emerge program training. Is it all women candidates? Yes. Thank you. And that Diane Dickey is currently running again for City Council. No, I'm sorry, County Commissioner. Sorry. Thank you for that correction. Yes.
On behalf of League of Women Voters, I would like to express our appreciation for your attendance. I would like to thank CCTV and that it will be broadcast and reach many more people. We hope it will be shown in the schools and maybe reach our young women there as well. League of Women Voters is a very good training ground for future leaders, and we have much of our population of women leaders that have come through that and worked their way up. So we also have intern programs. So again, I thank you all for coming on behalf of the women voters. And thank you, AEW. It's very nice. We always love to partner with you.
Thank you, Deanie Anderson of League of Women Voters. Thank you. We shall call it a day. Thanks for coming.